This all begins in the north, where Macbeth faces off against an army of Nords, Scots, and Irishmen. Like the man he is, Macbeth, Thane of Glamis, crushes his enemies in the name of King Duncan. Returning to Forres as heroes from the battle against the Norwegians, Macbeth and his comrade Banquo meet the three witches. Like the NSA, the witches seem to know everything. Not only did they know when Macbeth's battle would be over, they also foresaw into Macbeth's future. The witches hailed Macbeth as the Thane of Glamis, the Thane of Cawdor, and the King of Scotland. They then tell Banquo that his sons will be kings. This shows that fate is predetermined in Macbeth, or else what would the witches base their predictions on? Anyways, Macbeth and Banquo didn't even believe the witches were real at first. They instead thought that they were both on some type of drug. Ross then shows up right on cue and tells them that Macbeth is now the Thane of Cawdor, because the last guy got liquidated. Macbeth feels like his new title doesn't belong to him. He compares the Thane of Cawdor as borrowed clothing, in that titles, like clothing, can easily be stripped away. However, the prophecy doesn't seem like nonsense anymore. Ross's news whets Macbeth's appetite for power. He begins to have thoughts of regicide, but immediately regrets it, knowing it is wrong. Even though his morals remain intact, Macbeth's ambition has been sparked by the witch's prophecy, to which Ross's news now fuels. Macbeth has sent a letter to Lady Macbeth to tell her about the witches, and that Duncan is coming to a party at their castle. Her reaction is to kill Duncan and take the crown for their own. Unlike the stereotype that women of the medieval era are to be seen and not heard, Lady Macbeth shows us women can be as ambitious and resourceful as men. When Macbeth returns to Lady Macbeth, she tries to fan the flames of Macbeth's ambition. Then there's a back and forth between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth tells Macbeth that you're not a man unless you aggressively pursue your goals. Macbeth doesn't like being called a coward and agrees to murder Duncan for his throne. While waiting for the guards and Duncan to fall asleep, Macbeth sees a floating dagger, which quickly becomes bloodied. This foreshadows the chain of murders and guilt to come. Macbeth kills Duncan and then flips out. He begins to hear voices and believes that he will never sleep again. While Macbeth is going crazy, Lady Macbeth plants the dagger in the guards' hands to put the blame on them. Her plan works when the next morning the other Thanes walk into Duncan's murder scene, seeing two drunk guards holding daggers. To make sure there's no witnesses, Macbeth then kills the two guards. Blood is everywhere in this scene, and they represent the guilt and remorse that the Macbeths feel about their actions. With Duncan's heirs scared off to Ireland and England, Macbeth can accuse them of Duncan's murder and climb onto the Scottish throne. Yet after becoming king in the north by slitting his liege's throat, Macbeth still feels unsatisfied. The crown isn't enough for Macbeth. He wants to found a dynasty. Macbeth's ambition is renewed, and without any laws to hold Macbeth accountable, he is free to realize his unchecked ambition. Macbeth feels ripped off that Banquo's children will inherit the rewards of his crimes, so he gets peasants to assassinate Banquo and his son Fleance. When they attack, the peasants kill Banquo, but Fleance manages to escape the murderers somehow. You would think he would be able to find better assassins, considering they let a child escape from them. Meanwhile, Macbeth is hosting dinner for the other Thanes to gather support. Suddenly, Macbeth hallucinates and sees the ghost of Banquo, covered in blood, sitting in his seat at the banquet. Thanks to a combination of being guilty and being sleep-deprived, Macbeth is scared witless and starts to go mad. Unsettled by the news that Fleance has escaped, Macbeth goes to visit the witches again to demand them to tell him more about his own future. The witches conjure 4 apparitions, each with a prophecy. Beware of Macduff. Nobody born of a woman will ever harm Macbeth. Banquo will be a father to a line of kings. And finally, that Macbeth will never be defeated until Birnam Wood will come to Dunsinane. By now, Macbeth has given up on trying to be a fair and humble king like Duncan. His insecurities about his hold on his throne cause him to be a tyrant. After hearing Macduff has fled to England to help Malcolm, Macbeth has Macduff's family slaughtered. He then plants spies in his Thanes' homes to report any suspicious activity. Being a tyrant causes Macbeth to have a really low approval rating, so many Thanes are starting to desert him. On the other end of the island, Macduff meets Malcolm to convince him to return to Scotland so he can reclaim the throne. At first, Malcolm was like, "I'll be a worse king than Macbeth." And Macduff was like, "That's not possible." In the end, Malcolm says that yes, he would be a better king. So then they agree that a Scottish rebellion, with English aid, will return to Scotland to destroy Macbeth. But the good news is followed by bad news. Ross tells Macduff that Macbeth has killed his entire family. Macduff cries his eyes out in grief. He shows us that being a cold, aggressive killer does not make you a man. You can be a man and feel emotion at the same time, like kindness. While Malcolm's army is marching towards Macbeth's castle, Lady Macbeth is hating her life. Her guilt from Duncan's murders and the other people who have died is eating her alive. While sleepwalking, she tries to wash off the imaginary blood on her hands. She tries to free herself from the guilt, but can't, so then she supposedly commits suicide. Malcolm shows up with an army to challenge Macbeth. To hide his numbers, he orders his men to use the branches from Birnam Wood to camouflage the army. Macduff's betrayal, Malcolm's big army, and Birnam Wood coming to Dunsinane all suggest that the prophecy is coming true and Macbeth is finished. He still clings on to the hope that he can't be killed by someone born of a woman. He also starts to realize that life is entirely made up of fate, so life is actually quite pointless. While Macduff and Macbeth are dueling, Macbeth tells Macduff to save his breath, because Macbeth has a charm on his life that makes it so no one of woman born can hurt him. Macduff tells Macbeth that that charm is worth nothing, because his mother had a C-section, so he is technically not of woman born. Here Macbeth realizes how stupid he is to think he can try and defy fate, how meaningless his actions were. So he gives up and is beheaded. The consequences of his unending ambition have finally caught up to him, as those he hurt along the way get revenge. Malcolm becomes king and rules Scotland forever after. Or does he? For it is a cycle of life, signifying nothing.